Hello and welcome to English Vibes Hub. Today, we're going to talk about something that can be really challenging for many of us: small talk at a party. You know, those casual conversations you have with people you've just met or don't know very well. I'm Emma, and I'm here with Liam. Liam, have you ever found yourself standing at a party, wondering what to say to the person next to you?
All the time, Emma. It can be really awkward, especially if you're not sure how to break the ice. But I think that's what makes small talk so interesting. It's an art, really. You have to be able to think on your feet and come up with something engaging to say. One thing that might help is using phrasal verbs and idioms. For example, have you ever broken the ice at a party? It means to say or do something that helps people relax and start talking.
Exactly. Breaking the ice is a great way to start a conversation. Another phrasal verb that's really useful in these situations is to pick up on something. It means to notice and respond to something someone has said. For instance, if someone mentions they've just traveled back from a holiday, you could pick up on that and ask them about their trip. It shows you're interested in what they have to say and can lead to some really interesting conversations.
That's a great point, Emma. Being able to pick up on cues like that can really help the conversation flow. And it's also important to know how to carry on a conversation. This means to keep talking and responding to what the other person is saying, rather than just standing there in silence. One way to do this is by using follow-up questions. For example, if someone tells you they like reading, you could ask them what kind of books they enjoy or who their favorite author is.
Follow-up questions are fantastic for keeping the conversation going. And sometimes, you might find yourself in a situation where you need to change the subject. This means to stop talking about one thing and start talking about something else. It's useful if the conversation is starting to get boring, or if you realize you're talking about something the other person isn't interested in. For instance, if you're talking about the weather and it's clear the other person isn't really into it, you could say something like, "Speaking of outdoor activities, have you done anything exciting recently?" And then change the subject to something more engaging.
Changing the subject can be a bit tricky, but it's a great way to keep things fresh and prevent the conversation from becoming stale. Another idiom that's really useful in small talk is to see eye to eye. It means to agree with someone about something. If you find that you and the person you're talking to see eye to eye on a particular topic, it can be a great way to build a connection and continue the conversation. For example, if you both love a particular movie, you could discuss why you enjoy it and what you think about the plot or characters.
I completely agree, Liam. Finding common ground is one of the best ways to make small talk more enjoyable and meaningful. And it's not just about the words you use, but also about your body language and tone of voice. People are more likely to engage with you if you seem friendly and interested in what they have to say. So, remember to smile, make eye contact, and vary your tone of voice to show you're enthusiastic about the conversation.
That's so true, Emma. Nonverbal cues can make a big difference in how a conversation goes. And I think it's also important to be yourself and not try to be someone you're not. People can usually tell if you're being insincere, and it can make the conversation feel forced or awkward. Instead, focus on finding things you genuinely have in common with the other person, and let the conversation flow naturally from there.
Being genuine is key to any successful conversation. And I think we're just getting started on this topic. There are so many more phrasal verbs, idioms, and tips we can explore to help our listeners become masters of small talk. Liam, what do you think is the most challenging part of small talk for our listeners? And how can we help them overcome it?
Well, Emma, I think one of the biggest challenges is feeling comfortable enough to start a conversation in the first place. Sometimes, it can be intimidating to approach someone new, especially if you're not sure what to say. But I think if we can provide some practical advice and examples, our listeners might feel more confident and prepared the next time they are in a situation like that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a great point, Liam. And it's something we can definitely delve into further. Maybe we can even role-play some scenarios to give our listeners a better idea of how these conversations might play out in real life. What do you think about that idea?
I love it, Emma. Role-playing can be a really effective way to learn and practice new skills, especially when it comes to something like small talk. And it could be a lot of fun for our listeners to follow along and see how different conversations might unfold. Shall we give it a try?
Absolutely, Liam. Let's get into it. But before we do, I just want to remind our listeners that we're going to be covering a lot of ground in this episode. So be sure to stick with us as we explore more about small talk and how to make it work for you. We've got some great tips and examples coming up, and we don't want you to miss out.
And as Emma said, we're just getting started. There's a lot more to come, including some really useful phrasal verbs and idioms that you can use to improve your small talk skills. So let's take a deep breath, dive in, and see where the conversation takes us.
Sounds like a plan, Liam. All right, so let's say you're at a party and you see someone standing alone by the refreshments. What's a good way to approach them and start a conversation? Should you just walk up and introduce yourself, or is there a better way to do it?
That's a great question, Emma. I think one approach could be to use the environment to your advantage. For example, you could comment on the food or drinks and use that as a way to break the ice. Something like, "Wow, this cake looks amazing. Have you tried it?" It's a simple way to start a conversation and can lead to some interesting discussions.
Using the environment like that can be really helpful. And it's also important to be mindful of your body language when you approach someone. Make sure you're standing in a way that's open and inviting, rather than crossing your arms or legs, which can give the impression you're closed off or not interested in talking.
Body language is crucial, Emma. It can completely change the way a conversation goes. If you're standing with your back to the person or looking at your phone, it's going to be a lot harder to start a meaningful conversation. But if you're facing them, making eye contact and smiling, it's much more likely to go well.
Exactly. And once you've started the conversation, it's all about keeping it going and finding common ground. Let's say you've started talking to someone and you discover you both like hiking. What are some ways you could follow up on that and keep the conversation flowing?
If you both like hiking, you could ask them about their favorite hiking spots or what kind of hikes they enjoy. For example, what's the most challenging hike you've ever been on? Or have you ever hiked in any national parks? These kinds of questions can lead to some really interesting stories and experiences.
Those are great questions, Liam. And it's also a good idea to share your own experiences and stories. If you've been on a particularly memorable hike, you could talk about it and ask the other person if they've had any similar experiences. It's a way to build a connection and make the conversation more engaging.
Sharing personal stories can really help to deepen a conversation and make it more meaningful. And it's not just about the stories themselves, but also about how you tell them. Using descriptive language and expressing your emotions can make your stories more compelling and interesting to listen to.
I completely agree, Liam. The way you tell a story can completely change how it's received. And I think we're starting to get a good feel for how to navigate small talk at a party. But there are still a lot of scenarios we haven't covered yet. What if you're talking to someone and you realize you have nothing in common? How do you handle that situation?
That's a tough one, Emma. But I think even if you don't have any obvious common interests, you can still find ways to connect with the other person. You could ask them about their work or studies, or talk about current events. Sometimes just showing genuine interest in what the other person is saying can be enough to keep the conversation going, even if you don't have a lot in common.
That's a great point, Liam. And it's also important to remember that small talk isn't always about finding deep, meaningful connections with people. Sometimes it's just about being friendly and polite and making the other person feel at ease. So even if you don't have a lot in common, you can still have a pleasant and respectful conversation.
Exactly, and I think that's something we'll continue to explore as we go on. There are a lot of nuances to small talk, and it's not always easy to navigate. But with practice and a little bit of confidence, anyone can become better at it. Shall we keep going and see where the conversation takes us?
Sounds good to me, Liam. Let's keep exploring the world of small talk and see what other tips and insights we can share with our listeners. We're just getting started, and I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
I completely agree, Emma. One thing that's really important when it comes to small talk at a party is being able to pick up on cues and change the subject if the conversation is starting to go stale. I'd like to share a story about a time when I had to think on my feet and switch topics quickly.
Oh, that sounds like a great story, Liam. I'm all ears. What happened?
Well, I was at a party and I started talking to someone about their job, but it quickly became apparent that they weren't really passionate about it. They seemed bored with the topic, so I decided to steer the conversation in a different direction by asking them about their hobbies. It's a good idea to branch out and explore other topics when you notice the other person is losing interest.
That's a fantastic example, Liam. Branching out is a great way to describe it. It's all about being adaptable and responsive to the other person's cues. Another phrase that comes to mind is breaking the ice. Can you think of some ways to break the ice at a party, Liam?
Absolutely. One way to break the ice is to talk about the party itself, like the music or the food. You could say something like, "Have you tried the appetizers? They're really good," or "I love this song. It's one of my favorites." It's a way to ease into the conversation and make it more comfortable for both people.
I like that. Easing into a conversation is a great way to reduce awkwardness and make the other person feel more at ease. Now, let's do a role play to practice some of these skills. I'll start by playing the role of a guest at a party, and you can play the role of the host. We'll see how the conversation goes and where it takes us.
Sounds like a plan, Emma. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to the party. How do you know the host?
Thanks for having me. I'm a friend of a friend. I don't know many people here, so it's nice to meet you. How about you? Do you come to parties like this often?
Yeah, I do. I like meeting new people and mingling. It's a great way to expand your social circle and make new connections. What do you like to do for fun?
I love trying out new restaurants and traveling. How about you? Do you have any fun plans for the summer?
Actually, I'm thinking of taking a road trip to the beach. I've heard it's beautiful this time of year. Have you ever been?
Yes, I have. It's one of my favorite places to relax and unwind. The scenery is just stunning. You should definitely check it out if you get the chance.
I will, thanks for the recommendation. It was great talking to you. Maybe we can catch up again soon.
That would be great, Liam. I had a really good time chatting with you too. Okay, let's stop the role play there and talk about what we did well and what we could improve on.
One thing I noticed was that we both did a good job of playing off each other's comments and keeping the conversation flowing. We also used some great phrases like expanding your social circle and checking it out to add some interest to the conversation.
Exactly. And I think we did a good job of wrapping up the conversation nicely at the end. We didn't just stop talking abruptly, we found a way to tie things up and say goodbye in a friendly way.
Right? It's all about being mindful of the other person's feelings and making sure they feel comfortable and included in the conversation. Now, let's talk about some other phrases that might be useful in a situation like this. What do you think about the phrase hitting it off with someone?
I think it's a great phrase. When you hit it off with someone, it means you really connect with them and have a strong rapport. It's like you click and everything just falls into place.
That's a great way to describe it. And what about the phrase beating around the bush? How would you use that in a conversation?
Well, if someone is beating around the bush, it means they're avoiding talking directly or clearly about something. They might be skirting the issue or dancing around the topic instead of addressing it head-on.
Right? It's like they're tiptoeing around the subject, trying not to offend anyone or cause any tension. But sometimes it's better to just be straightforward and get to the point.
Absolutely. Being direct and clear can save a lot of time and confusion in the long run. Okay, I think we've covered some really useful phrases and concepts so far. Let's keep exploring and see what other insights we can share with our listeners.
Sounds good to me, Emma. I'm having a great time discussing this topic, and I'm sure our listeners are getting a lot out of it too. Let's keep the conversation going and see where it takes us.
I'd like to talk more about how to handle awkward silences in a conversation. What are some strategies you use to fill an awkward silence, Liam?
That's a great question, Emma. One thing I do is try to think of a question to ask the other person. It can be as simple as "How was your week?" or "What do you like to do in your free time?" It's a way to break the silence and get the conversation started again.
I like that. Asking questions is a great way to fill the gap and keep the conversation flowing. What about you, Liam? What do you think is the most challenging part of small talk at a party?
For me, it's probably trying to find common ground with someone. It can be tough to find something you both have in common, but it's worth the effort because it can really help to build a connection with the other person.
That's a great point, Liam. Finding common ground can be a challenge, but it's an important part of building a strong rapport with someone. Let's keep talking and see if we can come up with some more strategies for handling small talk at a party. You know, Liam, I think one strategy that can really help with small talk at a party is to use open-ended questions. This way, you're not just asking yes or no questions, but you're actually encouraging the other person to share more about themselves.
That's a great point, Emma. Open-ended questions can really help to break the ice and get the conversation flowing. And I think another thing that can be helpful is to be a good listener. If you're actively listening to what the other person is saying, you can pick up on things that you have in common and use those as conversation starters.
Exactly. Being a good listener is key. And I think it's also important to be yourself and not try to be someone you're not. People can usually tell when you're being insincere, and it can make them uncomfortable. Let's talk about some specific phrasal verbs that can be useful in small talk situations.
I'd love to. One phrasal verb that comes to mind is to touch base. This means to get in touch with someone or to catch up with them. For example, you might say, "I haven't seen you in ages. Let's touch base soon and grab coffee."
That's a great one, Liam. Another phrasal verb that can be useful is to follow up. This means to check in with someone after an initial conversation or meeting to see how things are going. For example, if you met someone at a party and they mentioned they were looking for a new job, you might follow up with them a few days later to see how their job search is going.
I like that one. And what about the idiom to be on the same page? This means to have a shared understanding or agreement with someone. For example, if you're discussing plans with a friend, you might say, "Just to make sure we're on the same page, let's confirm the details one more time."
That's a great idiom, Liam. And finally, let's talk about the phrasal verb to wrap up. This means to finish or complete something. For example, if you're at a party and you need to leave, you might say, "I think it's time for me to wrap up my evening and head home."
I think that's a great way to wrap up our conversation about small talk, Emma. We've covered a lot of useful tips and phrasal verbs that can help our listeners feel more confident in social situations.
Absolutely, Liam. And I think our listeners will really appreciate the examples we've given to illustrate each point. It's always helpful to have concrete examples to refer to when you're trying to learn something new.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about, Emma, and I hope they'll take away some useful tips and strategies for handling small talk at a party.
Me too, Liam. And I think it's time for us to move on to our final thoughts. Let's summarize some of the key takeaways from our conversation and provide some final advice for our listeners.
I think one of the most important things to remember is to be yourself and not try to be someone you're not. People can usually tell when you're being insincere, and it can make them uncomfortable.
That's so true, Liam. And I think another important thing to remember is to listen actively and respond thoughtfully. This will help you build a connection with the other person and keep the conversation flowing.
Exactly, and don't be afraid to ask questions and show genuine interest in the other person. This will help you find common ground and build a rapport with them.
I think that's great advice, Liam. And finally, let's talk about the importance of following up after a conversation. This can help you build a stronger connection with the other person and potentially lead to new opportunities or friendships.
That's a great point, Emma. Following up can be as simple as sending a text or email to say hello and see how the other person is doing. It can make a big difference in building a relationship with someone.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today, Liam. It's been a great conversation, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed it and learned something new.
Me too, Emma. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you about small talk at a party. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in to English Vibes Hub. If you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe for more content on learning English and improving your conversation skills.
And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can stay up to date on all our latest episodes. We'll see you in the next one, and happy learning.